Hey, Mike. Well, we've got something exciting. We've got a sponsor. Logos is graciously sponsoring us this month, and we'd like to let our listeners know that now is the time to get Logos if you have not done so far. And I mean, it is the best Bible software in the world.
Yeah, it is. I have to agree. I mean, a lot of listeners will know I worked there for 14 years up there in the Pacific Northwest. I haven't been there for a few years now, but I continue to use the product. It is hands down the best Bible software that you can get. And, with that, if you go up to the website, it's going to look really expensive because some of the packages are expensive because of all the value, all the books that you get in it. But you can get started now for just $49, which is unbelievable. There was nothing like that when I was there.
Yeah, I mean, you've got so much to choose from. Over 200,000 digital books. You've got, audio books. You've got videos. You got seminary level courses, commentaries. Mm-hmm. You can get it on your phone, tablet, computer. It's an awesome piece of software.
The neat thing about it is, like, if I'm working on my laptop and I'm doing something in Logos and my attention gets diverted or I have to go do something else, when I close that, if I opened it later on my iPad, it would be at the very same place. Like all the changes, all the books on my desktop would be right there for me. So it is cross-platform. Doesn't matter if you run just PC or Mac. Doesn't matter. They have versions for both. And the Mac edition is a true Mac edition. I was there when they created that. Again, just hands down, there's nothing like it. I use it literally every day, and I have a truckload of resources. People ask, do you have any information on the Book of Romans? It's like, yeah, I could drive a semi truck to your house with all the books and notes and articles and videos and courses, but people don't realize that all this information is accessible. It's out there, but Logos is your gateway to it.
Yeah, and if you want to dig into the original language, you can, even without knowing Greek and Hebrew, and Logos will even help you pronounce the words. And if you're going to prep for your sermon, I don't know how you would do so if you don't have Logos, but you can go so deep and broader in your Bible study than ever before with Logos.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was there when we pioneered what are called reverse interlinears, which means in the software, if you're looking at a Bible version, I think there are reverse interlinears for the 6 or 7 most used English translations. But let's say you had the NIV or the ESV or NASB, you can run Greek and Hebrew searches right from the English word, and it does its magic under the hood, and it's a true Greek and Hebrew search without even knowing the languages. So you can do word studies. Again, you don't have to go out and learn the languages. You can spend 1 or 2 years doing that first. You can do it from the first day on.
Now's the time to support us. If you value this show and our friends at Logos, you can go to logos.com/nakedbible and get started for just $49. There's hundreds of seminary level video courses, which is what Logos Mobile Ed.
Yep.
There's just an incredible wealth of information. So if you have not done so, now is the time to make the leap to help support our show and go to logos.com/nakedbible and start increasing your Bible study like never before.
You're listening to the Naked Bible Podcast. To support this podcast, visit nakedbiblepodcast.com and click on the support link in the upper right-hand corner. If you're new to the podcast and Dr. Heiser's approach to the Bible, click on New Start Here at nakedbiblepodcast.com.
Welcome to the Naked Bible Podcast, episode 436, the Epistle of Jude, part 5. I'm the layman, Trey Strickland, and he's the scholar, Dr. Michael Heiser. Hey, Mike, what's going on?
Well, not a whole lot. Ready to jump back into the book of Jude here.
Yeah,
people seem to like it. Yeah,
and especially this episode. We've got some weird stuff going on in Jude. This episode.
All the archangel Michael stuff. That's part of what people know Jude for.
Fighting over Moses with the devil. Who would not want an episode on this?
Yeah, it's almost like a Stranger Things episode. Well, let's jump in here. I'm going to read Jude 8 through 10. Our focus for this part, this episode on Jude, is going to be verses 9 and 10, but 8 gives us a little bit more of the context. So let me read that, and I'm reading from ESV. Yet in like manner, these people also, and he's referring to the false teachers, relying on their dreams, defile the flesh, reject authority, and blaspheme the glorious ones. But when the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." But these people blaspheme all they do not understand, and they are destroyed by all that they, like unreasoning animals, understand instinctively. So that's kind of weird. I mean, the first issue is that you have to, kind of get over the hump, is that the source for this idea, this conflict between Michael and the devil, is not found in the Old Testament. And, most commentators are going to point that out, so that they're going to sort of, end the story right there. But my view is, okay, it's not, the Old Testament isn't the source for the conflict, for the reference here, but it is the inspiration for it. And so that little sort of transition is going to separate what you're going to hear here from what you would get in the commentaries, because I think commentators, again, typically New Testament scholars, are missing some things here that really help shed light on what's going on here with this conflict, and why it would even be here, and what its meaning is. Let me give you for instance here. Gene Green, in his commentary on Jude, writes this: the story of the dispute between Michael the archangel and the devil over the body of Moses is not part of the Old Testament narrative, as diligent readers of Scripture know. Instead of appealing to the Old Testament, Jude's text is a book called The Assumption of Moses. Considerable confusion has existed from ancient times regarding whether or not this is the same book referred to as the Testament of Moses. Were these two distinct works a single work consisting of two sections, or two separate works which were subsequently joined together? And he's quoting the Anchor Bible Dictionary there for J.F. Priest. Then Green continues, whatever their relationship, the source Jude depended on was known by Clement of Alexandria, as well as Gelasius Cyzicensis, as the Assumption or Testament of Moses, or the Ascension of Moses. Quarreling between good and evil supernatural powers over the fate of a human being also has its antecedent in 4Q Amram, that's a Dead Sea Scroll, also known as 4Q 543 through 548, where the text records a dispute over Amram, who was Moses' father in the Old Testament story. And here's what the text says: and behold, two were quarreling over me, and they said, then there's a text gap, there's text missing, and they entered into a great debate over me. And I asked them, why are you, and then there's another gap, over me? And they replied and said, we have received control and control all the sons of Adam, unquote. So that's that Dead Sea Scroll fragment. Green continues and says, this particular text may or may not have been the source of the notion of a dispute over Moses' body. But Jude is embedded in a tapestry of tradition that weaves in Zechariah 3, 1 and 2 as well. Jude's quotation of the Assumption or the Testament of Moses includes a very clear echo of Zechariah's account of a dispute between the Lord and the devil. And I'm actually going to disagree with that. But Green continues that his notion that Zechariah's account is a dispute between the Lord and the devil, in this case over Joshua the high priest. The Septuagint version of Zechariah 3:2 reads, and the Lord said to the devil, the Lord rebuke you, devil, even the Lord who chose Jerusalem rebuke you. Now, where does this Zechariah 3 idea come from? Well, it comes from the Septuagint, as Green just read us how the Septuagint handles Zechariah 3, where we have the Satan, in the divine council, and he's accusing Joshua the high priest in that scene, and also the angel of the Lord is there, and you can go back and read Zechariah 3 if you like. But we know from Hebrew, again, we have the Satan here, but the word Satan is prefixed with a definite article, ha-Satan, which means it's not a proper personal name. So it's not the devil of, later New Testament or even intertestamental literature. But again, Green either doesn't know that or doesn't, somehow disputes it or whatever, but he's going with the Septuagint anyway. The Septuagint translator uses the word devil there, and so that's where it comes from. So could Jude be referring to that? Well, again, maybe, but I tend to doubt it because I think, again, under inspiration, that the New Testament writers are going to know what's going on in the Old Testament a little bit better than that. Most commentators, though, will wind up saying something about Zechariah 3 here, again, where we have Hasatan and accusing Joshua the high priest. Bauckham, for instance, his thoughts are representative. He writes, "The devil in his ancient role as accuser tried to establish Moses' guilt." This is his commentary on our Jude passage. "In order to prove him unworthy of honorable burial and claim the body for himself," unquote. Now, there are, as I've already hinted at, problems with this, and I'm going to give you 3 of them. And these are problems with any trajectory that has Zechariah 3 as the backdrop to Jude 9, which, again, no matter what academic commentary you pick up on Jude, they're going to mention Zechariah 3. The first problem is the text of Jude never says any of it. The text never has the devil accusing Moses of anything. If you go back and look at Jude, we read it at the beginning of the episode, Jude 8 through 10. It only says the devil was contending with Michael over the body of Moses. It doesn't say Moses is accused of anything. It just isn't there. So that sort of ruins any parallel with Zechariah 3. Secondly, there's absolutely no comment about Moses' guilt. Again, that's absent from the text of Jude. So the analogy to Hasatan in Zechariah 3 and Joshua the high priest is flawed. The reasoning is that Michael, as an archangel, is an opponent of Satan. Well, okay, I understand that reasoning. And Satan seeks to accuse the brethren. Again, that's understandable as well. It's all well and good, but the passage says nothing about Mosaic guilt. Again, that's just read into it by New Testament commentators. Third problem is the one I've already mentioned. The idea is also untenable because associating Zechariah 3 with the devil depends on violating Hebrew grammar. The Satan of Zechariah 3 is not the devil, and so all such appeals to Zechariah 3 are misguided. However, I think it's possible that Jude could have been thinking of the devil not because of Zechariah 3, though, but because of cosmic geography. And this is where I'm going to depart here. I'm going to explain this as we go on. I take Hasatan in Zechariah 3 as an unidentified spiritual adversary rather than the devil of the later literature. But by the time of Jude, a struggle between Michael and the devil was part of Jewish tradition. So if it didn't come from Zechariah 3, where did it come from? Again, remember, Moses isn't blamed for anything in Jude 9. There's no accusation in the text. And again, I mention this to repeat it, because that absence makes an identification with Zechariah 3 really unlikely. A better suggestion is, as I've already suggested, is that the tradition arises from cosmic geography. And I think the key to understanding what's going on here, and with the tradition more generally, is where Moses dies and where he's buried by God, and that is in the Transjordan, the territory on the other side of the Jordan that's not in Canaan. And I wrote about this passage in both my angels and my demons book. So I'm going to go back there and dip into that. I think to understand this, we need to recognize a couple of terms. And again, if you want a written summary of this, you could go to the angels book or the demons book and get it there. But I'm going to quote at length from the angels book anyway, and try to capture this here for the episode in the podcast. You need to understand a couple of terms going into it. And one is the Old Testament place name Oboth. That's Oboth. It's a place name, and it's also a term for underworld spirits, the Ovoth. Ovoth and Ovoth. Okay, spelled the same way. Same spelling, same written material, but it can be either a place name or a term for underworld spirits. And the other is Abarim or Ovarim. This is a place name and a term that means those who cross over. And the question is, into what? I mean, what does it mean to cross over? So Abarim in the Old Testament, if we looked it up in Hebrew, it's actually spelled with an O, an Ovarim. And if you translate that literally into Hebrew, it's those who cross over. So this place, both of these places in the Transjordan, were noted for known for underworld spirits and something crossing over again into this territory in the Transjordan. In certain contexts, those who cross over into the Transjordan it's actually a reference to the realm of the dead. Ovarim would be to the realm of the dead. Now, from angels, let me try to unpack this. I'm going to quote myself here, and in the process, I'm going to quote another scholar named Spronk, last name Spronk. And let's just jump in here. According to Deuteronomy 34:6, God buried Moses, quote, in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows the place of his burial to this day, unquote. So we're given a general location. The location has significance for Israelite cosmology and religion. This location is part of the geographical area that includes Ovot and Avarim. That's according to Numbers 21, 10 and 11, Numbers 33, 43 through 48. Mount Nebo, the mountain atop which Moses viewed the promised land before God laid him to rest, Deuteronomy 34:1, is in fact explicitly linked to Avarim in Deuteronomy 32:49. These locations were associated with the underworld and the ancient cults of the dead. Consequently, the valley mentioned in Deuteronomy 34:6 may very well be the valley of the Ovarim mentioned in Ezekiel 39:11. And Spronk discusses the place names. He says, the participle kal plural ovarim of the verb avar, to pass from one side to the other, seems to have a special meaning in the context of the cult of the dead, denoting the spirits of the dead crossing the border between the land of the living and the world of the dead. It can be interpreted as a divine name in Ezekiel 39:11 and 14, which may also have been preserved in the geographical name Abarim. And again, he quotes the same passages from Numbers 21, 10 through 11, Numbers 27, 12, 33, 44, and verses 47 through 48, Deuteronomy 32, 49, and Jeremiah 22, 20. Spronk continues, its Ugaritic cognate then would be Abarim in KTU 1.22, 115. So it shows up in Ugaritic texts. Still quoting Spronk here. In the Ugaritic text KTU 1.22, describing a necromantic session, the king invokes the spirits of the dead, the Rephaim, and celebrates a feast, probably the New Year festival, with them. It is told that they came over traveling by horse-drawn chariots. As they are taking part in the meal served for them, they are explicitly called those who came over, or those who crossed over. The valley of the Ovarim is located east of the sea in verse 11, which is probably the Dead Sea, so it was part of the Transjordan. This is a region which shows many traces of ancient cults of the dead, such as the megalithic monuments called dolmens, and place names referring to the dead and the underworld, namely Obot, Peor, and Abarim. That's the end of my material from the Angels book. Let me go to the Demons book, and I have a little bit more to say about this here. So I wrote this as follows. Some of the terminology for these fearful spirits derives from place names. So this is in the context, again, of talking about spirits of the dead, evil spirits in the Demons book. For example, the geographical area that includes Obot and Abarim in the Transjordan was associated with ancient cults of the dead. These two place names mean, respectively, spirits of the dead and those who have passed over, i.e. to the netherworld, unquote. The geographical associations with Ovarim are evident in Ezekiel 39:11, which indicates the valley of the travelers, that's the ESV, or the valley of those who cross over, is east of the sea. Again, east of the Dead Sea, so it's in the Transjordan. According to Spronk, again, the sea is probably the Dead Sea, so it is part of the Transjordan. This is a region which shows many traces of ancient cults of the dead, and as Spronk says, such as megalithic monuments called dolmens, and then these place names. The Hebrew name Ovot likewise has an otherworldly overtone and is associated with the spirits of the dead and those who work to communicate with those departed spirits. Tropper explains that Ov, that's the singular, is now more commonly understood to refer to the spirits of the dead, deriving the meaning from the Arabic cognate ava, to return. Other possible etymologies suggest interpreting Ov as hostile. a derivation of the root oyev, to be an enemy, or as ancestral. According to Tropper, those who argue for the meaning ancestral assume an etymological connection between ov and av, which means the latter means father or ancestor. The meaning ancestral spirit for ov is based on a number of considerations. In the ancient Orient, necromancy was part of the cult of the ancestors. This essentially involved the invocation and interrogation of the dead patriarch, from whom a family would seek advice and assistance. Several times in the Old Testament, the Hebrew term avot, fathers, similar to ovot, designates dead ancestors. Now that was quoting Tropper, back to what I wrote. Certain places removed from Canaan, the Holy Land. Again, think of what Canaan was. Canaan was Yahweh's turf, the Holy Land. Certain places removed from Canaan, the Holy Land, like Ovot and Abarim, since they're on the other side, were deemed the destination of those who passed over to the realm of the dead. The reference to the cult of the dead, or ancestor cults, is an important aspect of Old Testament theology of evil spirits. The realm of the dead was filled with the spirits of the human wicked and other evil supernatural spirits. In addition to Ovot and Ovarim passed over, members of that fearful motley assembly went by various terms associated with ongoing contact with the living. And that's the end of what I have in the Demons book. So what would all of this mean for Jude 9? I'm going to go back to my Angels book and one more paragraph and read this. In view of these data, it seems reasonable to conclude that Moses would have been buried in the place associated with the realm of the dead and unfavorable cosmic geography, turf that was not part of Yahweh's covenantal land. It is in turn quite understandable if a Second Temple Jewish tradition arose about the body of Moses, arguably the central figure in Israelite history, being contested by the Lord of the dead, Satan, by the time of that period. In other words, by the time of the Second Temple period. Michael was Israel's prince, the guardian of Yahweh's portion, according to Daniel 10:21 and Daniel 12:1. So he would be the logical candidate to claim the body of Moses for the eschatological land of promise, or the domain of Yahweh in the afterlife. That's the end of the quote. Now, here's how the tradition works, viewed from the perspective of cosmic geography, not Zechariah 3. Again, Moses isn't guilty of anything. Jude never says that. There's no accusation against him. So Moses dies in a place later associated with the realm of the dead, the bad realm of the dead, the place where evil spirits are, because of, again, these terms, Ovarim and Ovot. He's not on Yahweh's covenantal turf. Moses was not buried with his fathers. Remember that old patriarchal phrase from the Old Testament. He wasn't buried with his fathers in a marked grave in Yahweh's land. Now, interestingly enough, here's the actual passage from the Testament of Moses, which I think supports what I'm saying here. So this is Testament of Moses 11, 1 through 8. When Joshua heard the words of Moses, so written in his testament, all the things which he had said, he tore his garments and fell at Moses' feet. And Moses, though he wept with him, encouraged him. And Joshua replied to him, saying, Why do you console me, Master Moses? And in what way may I be consoled concerning that bitter message spoken, which has gone forth from your mouth, a message full of tears and sobbings, because you are departing from this people? Then there's a little section that's lost. What place will receive you? Or where will be the marker of your sepulchre? Or who as a man will dare to move your body from place to place? For all who die, there are appropriately their sepulchres in the earth, but your sepulchre is from the rising of the setting of the sun, and from the south to the limits of the north, and the whole world is your sepulchre. That's the end of the section. So in the Testament of Moses, there's, Joshua is concerned about where Moses' body is ending up. Again, it's not marked in the Old Testament. He's just on this other side. He says, what place will receive you, or where will be the marker of your sepulchre? Or who as a man will dare to move your body from place to place? So that apparently there was this sense of Moses' body needing to be moved at some point. They need to find it and move it. Well, where would they move it? Well, of course they would move it to Yahweh's territory, where it properly belongs. So I think Joshua, again, is upset as Moses dies and is not buried with his fathers or among his own people in the land. And that thought would lead to, well, if he's in this other bad place, this other unfavorable cosmic geographical location, then the Lord of the dead is going to want to keep the body of Moses in his own turf, robbing Moses of salvation, rest, or afterlife deliverance from the realm of the dead. And of course, in later tradition, in the Second Temple period, going on, riffing from the book of Daniel, and if you believe Daniel was written late, that's in the Second Temple period. If you believe it was written earlier, it's still precedent. But Michael had charge over God's covenantal claim, God's, turf, the Lord's portion, Israel, Canaan, okay? Michael is charged, therefore, with contending for Moses' body to remove it to Yahweh's domain, for he is the guardian of Yahweh's domain. So therefore, logically, if you're thinking these thoughts, it would be Michael versus Satan for Moses' body. So what is Jude's point in all this? Why bring it up? Again, I think if the tradition is understandable, it's parsable if you're looking at it from the perspective of cosmic geography instead of Zechariah 3. But again, what's Jude's point? I think it's that when contending with the devil, Michael refused to rebuke the devil personally. I think this is what Jude wants his readers to see, because he's talking about the false teachers and how they blaspheme the glorious ones. And then he brings up the example of Michael and says, look, even Michael didn't do this. And then he refers to the tradition of Michael, contending with Satan over the body of Moses. So when contending with the devil, Michael refused to rebuke the devil personally. He would not utter a word against one of the glorious ones, thereby committing blasphemy, because the devil is still a member of the divine council in the sense that he's an Elohim. I mean, he's one of these created beings. Now, he's no longer in God's employ. He's in a state of rebellion against God, but he's still an Elohim. I mean, all you could say, to be technically, accurate here, all spiritual beings are Elohim. Again, if you've read my work, if you've read Unseen Realm, if you've listened to me often enough, this is familiar territory to you. But he's still one of this class, and Michael refuses to blaspheme or speak against another member of really his own lot. These spiritual beings, as we've covered in the last two installments of Jude. The glorious ones were, again, these members of the divine council, members of the heavenly host. And these false teachers were speaking words against them, blaspheming them. And so Jude's point is, look, even Michael didn't do this. And you'd think Michael would have the authority to do it, but even he doesn't. He says, the Lord rebuke you. So he appeals to the Lord's authority. Even in his, even in Satan's rebel status, Michael won't rebuke him personally. He has respect for the status of the sons of God in that way. Instead, he appeals to God's own authority, the Lord himself. And this is especially appropriate because the devil, or Satan, is Lord of the dead. I mean, after all, that is his new domain of authority because of his fall, because of his rebellion. He becomes the Lord of the dead. So Michael doesn't assume the authority to rebuke him personally. He appeals to God. But the false teachers, again, Jude's point, lacked this humility and sense of propriety. They therefore blaspheme what they do not understand. This is another way of rejecting authority, on their part. God has made Satan Lord of the dead because humanity followed suit in rebellion. This is why we have an underworld, because of the fall. And Satan is cast down to the earth, or under the earth. He's cast down to Eretz, which is another word for Sheol, the grave under the earth, again, the realm of the dead. This is where he has his authority now. And his authority is the result of the fall, yes, but instead of annihilating him, God, grants him this because God is a respecter of free will, because we're created as imagers. So those who fall, those who reject, God's salvation, this is where they're going to end up permanently. Those who, accept the Lord's salvation are going to be removed from Sheol. So the Lord does have the authority to remove, those who are righteous from the underworld. And this is the authority to which Michael is going to be appealing. God has made Satan Lord of the dead again because humanity followed suit in rebellion. Humans are sinners. In the absence of Eden, all die and go to that realm. But Michael, again, charged with Moses, deliverance, the deliverance of the body, to get him, eschatologically speaking, to get his body in the proper place. Again, appeals to the Lord's authority to do this. So he depends on God's authority. Once again, the false teachers. If Jude is bringing this up as a sort of as an object lesson, the false teachers are again portrayed as arrogant spiritual idiots. I mean, this is why Jude does it. Now, there's a happy ending to this. Moses was present with Jesus at the Transfiguration. So Moses is with the Lord. Okay? Again, with this whole set of circumstances, you can see how the ideas, again, would arise and how they would sort of hold together, how they would make sense on their own terms. And then ultimately, again, Moses is with the Lord. So it fills in for the ending, for the earlier writer of the Testament of Moses, who didn't, he's writing before Christ, before, the time of Jesus, before New Testament theology is laid out, before, you have something like the Transfiguration. So this is the answer to the question raised in the Testament of Moses. Where does Moses end up? He ends up with the Lord. But you get there, again, by appealing to cosmic geography tradition, Michael tradition, Satan as the devil as the Lord of the dead, that whole tradition. Again, all of these traditions have their roots in the Old Testament and in cosmic geography, and they make sense, again, since all the component pieces come from the Old Testament. You can see how they would have come together in these ideas that Jude, references and picks up on for his teaching. Again, and the whole purpose of his teaching is to say the false teachers are just spiritual idiots. I mean, even Michael doesn't speak against, personally, other members of the heavenly host. He doesn't do that. Even the ones who are in rebellion, the ones who are no longer on the payroll, like the devil, he won't do it. But these false teachers, they just do it willy-nilly because they don't know anything. And Jude doesn't want his readers, those who are, come into contact with his epistle, he doesn't want them following these false teachers because they're going to be misled. They're wrong in their theology. And Jude is contending for the faith once delivered, to the believing community. And part of his message is to get people to turn away from the false teachers. And he's used various Old Testament examples, archetypal examples, to get them to do this. He used the sins of the sons of God in Genesis 6. He used Sodom and Gomorrah. Again, the last few parts of Jude that we've gone through in the podcast, Jude is trying to persuade his listeners to turn away from the false teachers. And this is another example that he uses to illustrate the badness of them. In other words, how misguided they are and how unworthy of being followed they are. Now, the next time we get together for an episode of the podcast, we're going to be looking at more Old Testament archetypal sinners. It's going to be Cain and Balaam and Korah, because Jude's going to just keep pouring it on, comparing the false teachers to all these bad examples in the Old Testament that have these deep Old Testament roots in an effort to get people to turn away from false teaching.
I'm loving the Jude Bible study, and I'm looking forward to part, 6? Jude's turning out to be quite a 6. Handful of parts. It's probably going to be 30 parts in Jude. Who would have thought that,
I don't think we'll get that many.
All right. Well, more the merrier. All right. Don't forget to go visit our sponsor at logos.com/nakedbible. And now's the time to support them and us. If you don't mind, if you haven't made the plunge yet, we'd appreciate it. We look forward to part 6 next week, Mike. And with that, I want to thank everybody for listening to the Naked Bible Podcast. God bless.
Thanks for listening to the Naked Bible Podcast. To support this podcast, visit www.nakedbibleblog.com. To learn more about Dr. Heiser's other websites and blogs, go to www.drmsh.com.